60 Industrial Park Avenue between Tennessee and Alabama in the Tri-City Center. Google Terry's Diner Redlands on Yelp or find them terrysdinerredlands.com.
KCAA is your CNBC News affiliate. We're the station that gets down to business.
Thank you for tuning in for this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali. I am Attorney Zulu Ali with the Justice Watch crew. Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, Dr. Akil Bashir. And this week, like every week, we'll be talking about critical issues affecting our communities. This week, in fact, we'll be talking about the issue of school bullying. And is school breeding a breeding ground for learning criminal behavior? Joining us in our discussion today is junior high school students Conte Carter and Milena Riggs. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for being here. So first of all, Milena, how old are you?
12.
Okay, and what school do you go to?
Zamboni.
What was that again? You can speak into the mic. Bend over.
Okay, I'm 12 and I go to Zamboni.
Okay, and where's that at?
In Paramount.
Okay, and that's in Los Angeles County, correct?
Yes.
And what about you, Conte? Where do you go to school?
I go to school in Zamboni.
Okay, and how old are you?
I'm 14.
Okay, all right. So both of you are in middle school, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to thank you guys for coming in with us and joining us in this discussion. We're going to be talking about school bullying. And I guess we'll begin by talking a little bit how significant that issue is. Of course, we've seen a significant increase of reporting of bullying. I think they really didn't begin to start keeping statistics till around 2005, at least the U.S. Department of Education. And of course, the reason why they began to start keeping those statistics around 2005 is because of the prevalence of school bullying, which at that time was around 28%. And of course, right now they're saying that approximately 1 out of every 5 students has reported being bullied. This is according to the National Center for Educational Statistics. This was a 2016 report. And they also started talking about the issue of different types of bullying. And I think that most of us, unfortunately, just consider bullying, at least in my day, it was the guy on the playground. You know, you go to school, you might spend, 30 minutes, 45 minutes on the playground, and then there's the kid that wants to bully and pick on other students. And for the most part, I believe that although bullying has obviously been something that's been around us, I guess, forever, obviously it was one of those things that pretty much just stopped at that point. Mm-hmm. Generally, it's something that you saw at school, after school, then basically that was the end of it. However, now of the prevalence of internet and social media, it goes beyond that. It goes beyond the whole idea of the one kid that comes up and picks on another kid for some reason and physically attacks them. Nowadays, you have so many different ways in which individuals are bullying. Bullying pretty much, for the most part, was limited to the issue of like physical abuse. That's what we would typically think of it. Mm-hmm. However, I think that what individuals don't understand is that bullying goes beyond just physical abuse. Obviously, there's bullying that comes from the mental abuse, being picked on, and again, nowadays you have people going on Instagram, they going on Facebook. What's the other one? Twitter? Mm-hmm. Is it Snapchat? What is that?
Snapchat.
Yeah, whatever that is. They got people. I heard that the other day. They going on Snapchat, and even nowadays everybody has a cell phone. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really stop. I mean, it goes to the issue of not necessarily the physical abuse, but it goes into the mental abuse of an individual who is constantly picked on and demeaned to the extent that it has a significant impact on the being defamed, so to speak. What also is interesting is that the bullying for females is slightly higher than the bullying of males. So now what you're seeing obviously more and more females that are actually engaged in bullying other individuals than you do males, which I think is also something else that, again, we didn't keep statistics in the past, but at least from my personal experiences and things that I observed, the bullying among females was not nowhere near as prevalent as it is today. I mean, you even see today YouTube videos, Facebook videos, where you have kids being picked on and physically attacked. So I mean, it's a significant problem. And they're also saying that basically the amount of bullying typically does not stop unless you actually have a peer intervention, and I don't know how prevalent peers are as far as intervening in the unfortunate aspect of it. And also one of the tragic things that you're seeing is the ever-increasing suicides among, young people who have been subjected to the bullying. So we've seen time and time again where you've seen individuals that have resorted to just taking their own life as a way of dealing with the ever-increasing bullying. So it is a huge issue right now with regards to bullying. And I want to ask, first of all, Milani, I want you to at least give me your input as to how you see this whole, do you see bullying a lot at your school?
Yes.
And how often do you see it?
Every day.
Okay. And when you say bullying, at least for you guys, how do you guys define bullying? What does that mean to you?
Calling people names, making fun of them, pushing them around.
Okay. And so what about the school? I mean, are the schools themselves, the teachers, the principals, those individuals, how involved are they with regards to stopping the bullying?
In my personal opinion, they aren't involved a lot at all.
Okay. And why do you think that is? Is it because they don't see it, nobody's reporting it? What do you think causes the school or the school officials not to be involved?
Most people report it, but some kids are usually scared because they feel they might get bullied as well for being a snitch.
Oh, okay. All right. And so as far as being reported, so are you saying that the teachers just, do they call the students in? I mean, what would a teacher typically do with regards to someone who reports being bullied?
The furthest that they will take it is, let's say, giving them detention. That's all.
All right. And then when they get detention, I mean, typically what happens after that? Do they go back to being bullying? Does it correct the problem? I mean, what happens after that?
It doesn't correct the problem.
Oh, wow.
At all.
Yeah. Wow. What about you, Conte? What do you see as far as bullying is concerned?
Well, sometimes I see bullying on like the basketball courts or like things behind the gym where like kids are around but like no adults are around.
Okay. And basically, what is your opinion with regards to, do people typically report the bullying, or at least in your experience, what do you see?
Sometimes people report the bullying. It depends on like, sometimes people report the bullying. It depends on who the teacher is or like who's around or who's aware or who's watching. Okay.
And do the teachers usually do anything about it?
I know for one thing the teacher does is the counseling comes to them and pull them out of class and they talk to them and they do strategies to help the person that's being bullied.
And what kind of strategies? Are you aware of what they do to help these individuals?
No, I never seen them do the strategies.
Okay. All right. Or you think that they're not doing them, or you just haven't seen them doing them?
I just haven't seen them doing them.
Okay. All right. And so for you, I mean, how often do you see bullying in school? Is it something that you see randomly, or is it something that happens all the time?
No, it doesn't really happen all the time. It happens every once in a while.
Okay. All right. And what about with you, Milani? How often do you believe it happens?
Pretty much every day.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you think that you guys go to the same school?
Yes.
And do you think that with you, Milani, being a female, do you think that females are bullied more than males?
Yes, sometimes.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay. And does it end at school, or do you think that people are bullied at home once they leave school as well?
They're probably bullied at home or once they leave school.
And where do you think that bullying comes from? Is it like typically through the internet, or where does that bullying take place?
Like through the internet or like personally.
Okay. All right. And so as far as and one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about with regards to the issue of bullying is, Rosa, as far as the statistics among the racial statistics, do you think that, do you see any difference between African American students and non-African American students? What is the statistics of?
Well, according to the National Center for Educational Statistics, they reported that 25% of African American students get bullied, 22% of Caucasian students get bullied, and 17% of Hispanic students get bullied. So there's definitely an increase of students getting bullied in the minority communities.
Right. Do you agree with that, you guys? Do you think that minority students get bullied more, or do you think, what do you see? You think
I agree.
Well,
Yeah.
and why do you think that is?
Because most of us get bullied for our appearance, like color, the things that we wear, because it's not cool enough, it's not good enough, but that's probably all that they can afford.
Right.
And it's not their fault, nor is it their parents.
Right.
So I feel that way.
So, oh wow. So you're telling us that basically a lot of times that you have, this issue where people may bully on other kids because of the fact that they don't have the clothing and some of the things that some of the so-called cooler kids have.
Yes.
And you think that that's more prevalent among black students than it is other students?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do you feel that same way?
Yes.
You think so? Okay. So the shoes, the shirts, and when you talk about color, what do you mean by that? Do you talk about complexion?
Yes.
So you think that sometimes students who may be darker complected may be picked on more than lighter complected?
Yes.
And what kind of things do they say? I mean, when you're talking, what are the things that you hear?
Well, frequently my sister came home telling me that a Hispanic little boy came to her and said that she was in the oven for too long and she looked like a burnt potato. And I was like, well, next time this happens, you need to just ignore it. I understand it hurts your feelings a lot, but you can't let that bother you, because they're just words, and at the end of the day, words, they shouldn't hurt you because it's not physically hurting you, although it might mentally hurt you, but it's not true. So if you believe that it's true, then maybe you should talk to an adult about it, but don't let things that aren't true affect you.
Okay. And what about you? How do you feel about that?
Like, I heard here and there people calling this one kid at the school. It's always a one person at the school. They call him Crackhead Bobby and all these other different names.
Okay. And how does he respond to that?
So I think, my opinion, he probably plays it cool, and I'll know when he gets home.
Okay. Yeah, I think that basically the way that we're socialized in our society, and I don't think it's relative. Actually, it's not new. I think that issues regarding the way that children are treated by other children actually is, the way that we are socialized as people in general in this particular society. I think that one of the problems that we have in our society, and one of the reasons why that we're probably on the lower echelon as far as especially the European. And many of the Asian countries, that why we're so lower down on the level is because I think that we probably tend to use school more as a socialization tool than we do an actual learning tool. I mean, most of us, when we go to school, that is really what it is. It's really a way of socializing, and most people, the more you advance in school, the more it becomes more of a social institution. I think that there has been studies about individuals who goes to school, especially those who are required to wear uniforms as opposed to other mechanisms, or just generally students going to school and kind of learning the being socialized with regards to, how we fit into society economically, where we begin to start this whole lower, middle, and upper class, and we learn this behavior about the way that we treat each other at a very early age. In fact, for many people, you learn more about the way that you mistreat individuals than you learn about what really goes on in school, right? I mean, one of the things is that, there was a study that was done where individuals were given questions that were on naturalization tests to become U.S. citizens. Most U.S. citizens can't even answer those questions. Many of those individuals don't know who their congressmen are. They don't know who their senator. They don't know how a bill becomes a law. Most of us right now, we don't have those types of things. We're not focused on learning things that teach us how to become better citizens, right? So we basically learned very early this whole social construct as to how we separate each other and how we demean and mistreat each other. That's kind of much of what you really learned in school. More than, those are the things you remember more than science class or math class or, you know, social studies class. Those are the things that we pay more attention to. And I think that we clearly, you know, obviously bullying, how do you deal with that? How do you change the way in which people at such an early age are exposed to the whole idea of not being treated in a humane way? I mean, I think that we obviously begin by trying to, number one, take away those things that differentiate between each other. And one begins with the whole idea of the things that we're allowed to wear to school. I mean, I'm all for individuals going to school and being required to wear uniforms, because that should not even come into play. No one at such an early age should be subjected to those sort of things, where it's more important about what you wear, how cool you are, and the way you look. You know, so I think that that's something that, you know, in many ways, you know, I think that is it intentional? Is that the way that we do things in public school? Because many of those who are in education, and I'm not here to bash those individuals who choose education and teaching, which is an extremely honorable profession, but I think that many of our school boards and our school districts need to begin to start paying more attention as to how they need to change the way students are being treated. Many students are treated differently just based upon their parents. Some students may not have parents that are as active in PTA or many other organizations that you may have in school, and sometimes even in some of the more affluent communities, students are treated differently based upon the involvement of their parents and who their parents are. You know, a lot of students, if you have, at least when I was in school, you clearly had parents, children that were treated better based upon the relationship that they had with the school board. Some people have more time to spend with the school board and do the politicking that oftentimes that takes place within the Board of Education or whatever the district educational board that they have, wherever you are. So I believe that basically, you know, we're pretty much who we are as a nation, and a lot of the division and a lot of the conflict that we have going on in our country it begins with the way that we were socialized in school. You know what I mean? So, and that's why you see a lot of the individuals that are in charge of making decisions within our nation, even at some of the highest levels, are individuals who were socialized in schools and learned at a very early age that it's okay to mistreat people based upon what they look like, who they are, their religion, their color, and all these other things, which is horrible. I think, you know, how do we deal with that? I mean, how do you prevent that? Do you teach children how to treat other individuals? Do you have classes on humanity? Do you have classes? We don't even have civic classes anymore. We don't have classes on financial literacy. You know, children don't know anything about voting. They don't understand any of these things, and they're actually, you know, but the argument is that, you know, we don't, those are things that should be taught by the parent. But unfortunately, you know, we cannot punish the child for what the parent cannot or do not or don't or cannot get involved in. Sometimes, you know, it's a never-ending cycle. So I do believe that we need to start trying to figure out ways that we can teach our younger people how to become better citizens, right? And that's what you're doing. I mean, if you can't graduate from school being a good citizen, then the education system is failing you. It doesn't make any difference how high you score on a test if you're a terrible individual. That doesn't really matter. Or it doesn't matter how many touchdowns you throw or how many yards you gain or all these other things that are important, more important really in many cases in school, because the academic performance when you begin to start bullying people is really not at the top of the concern when you're in that type of environment. And so I'm going to ask you, I'm assuming both you, Conte, and Milani, are you're good students, is that correct?
Yes.
And so by being good students, do you get picked on for being a good student? Is that something that's kind of one of the things that may cause you to be picked on?
No, not really.
Okay. And as far as the coolest students, are the coolest students always the ones that outperform academically? Or are they usually the ones that just wear cool stuff?
They're
Yeah,
usually the
one
ones
that
that
wear
wear
more cool
the
stuff.
cool stuff.
Okay. And so they're the ones that kind of get away and kind of are seen as far as the cool kid and really don't have as many problems as maybe some of the other kids, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so today I want to kind of get Rosa to chime in a little bit, since I always pick on you because you're the youngest. So I kind of want to get your take on how do you feel about this whole issue of bullying in school?
I think bullying in school is, coming from my perspective in what I've seen this past week in voting and everything that's been going on, and the conference after the voting, I think that bullying starts even in the house. It starts in government. It starts with elites. It starts with people that are adults. And I feel like seeing it in schools, it's sadly nothing new, but it's something that they don't pay attention to, that the government doesn't pay attention to, because they're so busy bullying each other, But I feel like also this socialized separation starts in elementary, because I was talking to my sister-in-law actually this week. She's an elementary school teacher, and she was telling me about how legally there's this separation between English learners, students that are put through the English learner process, and with students that are put through the regular process. So putting them in that English learner kind of program already places them at a disadvantage, because they're kind of separated from another group of students, and those students are provided with less funding. They're provided with teachers that are kind of more and they don't have the experience that the regular teachers would have. And that in itself places them at a disadvantage. And that's where you have kids that are, they don't have the funding. They don't have the parents that are at home. They don't have the cool clothes. They don't have all of that. And that in itself leads them to be bullying. And honestly, I feel like this is something that is also happening, cyberbullying. You were mentioning cyberbullying. I feel like we live in a society that is so negative, and that kids are crying out. We're seeing Facebook Live suicides by 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, and we're not paying attention to it. So I feel like it's a very intersectional issue, that there's no real kind of answer of where to kind of attack it. There's so many things that we can do to fix it, but it's also very intersectional in itself, and that makes it even harder to kind of see where we can provide solutions to help these children.
And what about you? I know that Bilal, you have the organization Motivatium, where you're dealing with a lot of youth as far as the bullying is concerned. I mean, how prevalent or how often do you come across that? Because I know that you're dealing with children of different age groups.
I look at it like this. I kind of tend to agree with everything that's been said, especially along the lines of what you wear. What you wear can dictate, your economic status. And I can remember back in the days when the first day of school was always that day that everybody looked at everybody's clothes. Who got on the brand new shoes, who got on the brand new gear, because that was going to determine how they was going to see that person throughout the year, whether that person was rich or whether that person was poor. But even once you get past that, even once you put the uniform on, so you put the uniform on, now it trickles down to your shoes. Okay, if you change your shoes, then it goes to your hairstyle. If you change the hairstyle, then it goes to whether or not you receiving A's and B's or whether or not you failing, whether or not you in special education. So it's like a never-ending cycle. It continues on. Kids always find something to pick on another kid about. And one of the things in Motivate, one of the things that I teach is that the two number one killers of our youth is peer pressure and boredom, which is peer pressure and boredom. Peer pressure leads to the bullying. The bullying leads to suicide. You got 4,400 kids per year that commit suicide due to being bullied. And then the schools are not doing too much. They have a 1 week anti-bullying week. Well, what 1 week is going to do, when you see this young lady say it happens every single day. It has to be somehow incorporated inside the educational curriculum to make these kids start understanding who they are as individuals. Okay, the hell with some math, the hell with some English and science. Implement something that can teach them to be better individuals. Because if we don't, we're going to continue to fail them. We're going to continue to see these suicide rates go up.
Right, right. What about you, Doc? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think everybody's been right on. It's always good to hear from our youth. But again, as I always concentrate on, we got to look at the core problem or the real root issues of what's going on. You know, when you think about the school system, especially when you think about elementary school to middle school, these are defining years for our young adults, okay? Every school system has a caste system. And all those adults, I mean, all those youngsters within that school system know of that caste system. They know who is the key player. They know the geographic areas of the school, what's to avoid, etc. Now, we also have to admit that school is a part of the problem. If school is not teaching the young adult how to define themselves, how to see that resilience in self, etc., if the school is only teaching those fundamental R's and some of their subjects has a degradation of our youth within those subjects, not teaching the real cultural context of the importance of what those youth played or those generations that those youth come from played, that creates a certain degree of inferior negativity. Now, let's really call bullying what it is. Bullying is actually forced violence degradation. We use this damn copacetic term of bullying like it's some flowers and just the child's being said some few negative words or pushed in the corner. Bullying defines the character of individuals, and it makes other individuals submit to an inferior state of being to where they feel no worth, no value, and they are pushed to the point of suicide, which is a temporary problem, a permanent, temporary problem with a permanent solution. So we have to look at what is happening in the whole school dynamic. Now, the resiliency that has to be taught is where that child, where that young adult has enough value, has enough self-respect that those terms, those words, and those actions that are thrown at that child can easily be brushed off. Where the violence perspective comes into being, Brother Ali, is when those individuals are physically assaulted and physically attacked. And the school does not deal with that type of engagement. So if I know I'm going to be attacked and that school is not going to do anything, I'm either going to go in a shell or I'm going to come up with some defensive mechanisms to deal with that situation, and I'm going to fight fire with fire. And when we look at the gang culture on the school campus, one of the things we have to realize is most of that culture or most of the individuals that aside with those gangs in the school is usually because of protection, because they have been bullied, and because they're looking for some type of a safe zone, which that school is not providing. So I think real quick and summing everything up, we have got to teach that resiliency. We have got to teach our youth the value of self. We have got to give them tools and strategies to engage the bullying, and then we've got to create a component or a nexus to where that child at the end of the day can see there's some degree of hope and greatness. And the most important thing is we have to hold our school to a much higher standard and require more from them. The school is a public entity that is paid for by tax dollars. So we are going to have to step up, redefine what the culture of the school system looks like, and make sure that that school is an extension of home and operates from our perspective where we're securing our young adults and making sure they're not being degraded, they're not being humiliated, and they're not being devalued and disrespected.
Well said. Yeah. One of the things that's interesting about the whole idea is trying to figure out, obviously with the cyberbullying, which makes it, I think that extends the possibility and the vulnerability of students because it goes beyond just the campus.
Yes.
You know, so you're talking about something that's intruding in your life, and someone is consistently on a daily basis throughout the day, weekends, afternoon, evening, it doesn't matter, someone is picking on you. And so what happens is that, it's one of those things where I don't really know whether individuals don't know how to deal with it because we've become so accustomed to the fact that individuals, as we function through societies, we are clearly creating children and a generation that's unable to think for themselves. So what happens is that basically by bullying at some point in time becomes a defense mechanism. You know, almost like, you know, either you're going to be, you know, prey, or you're going to be the person who's going to impose it or receive it.
Spot on.
So the only way that you can actually function and not be a victim is oftentimes, you know, participating in it. Because if you sit around and you don't do anything about it, then basically then you're going to be the person that's going to be the prey. And so now that's kind of the way that we function, you know, throughout society, throughout our lives. You know, how we're teaching them and then to be that way, and it spreads beyond that. And so now I think that the only way that you can really deal with it is that you have to actively provide something on a daily basis to make sure that they understand that what they're doing is not right. You know, whether it's, you know, having classes. You know, it's hard to say, because I don't know how to really do this, because obviously at some point in time I would like to have someone who's involved in education. I know that you are, Doc, at the you know, at the college level, but trying to have some sort of class or some sort of orientation or something that's on an ongoing basis that addresses the issue of bullying and the effects of it and the reason why it's wrong. You know, that's the thing about teaching, you know, our kids. We're teaching them things, but we're not teaching them, you know, how to be good human beings, right? And that's something that, you know, unfortunately, how do you do that? And that's the thing that is missing. That is missing from our society is the whole idea of teaching people to be good people. And then the irony is that we've been so socialized so much that we don't even know that we're being bad people. You know what I mean? I mean, you hear some of the rhetoric, you know, around the president and people who are even using their religion to justify it, or their, you know, that this is okay, you know, these people are bad people, or, you know, we should hate these people, or, you know, I mean, it's so much around us. And when you have a country where you're being led by an individual who actually is involved in bullying himself, then, you know, and then the people who have accepted it as a nation, and now we're beginning to start trying to figure out. They said that out of the first 311 days of this year, there was 306 mass shootings. You know, and so I mean, almost every day there was these mass shootings of individuals who are mentally disturbed, and they're, you know, because you have no outlet. You can put so much stuff on individuals that's how they're going to respond to you. And I think that you're seeing the increase in these mass shootings because you're seeing the rhetoric of the country. The leaders of our country are speaking like bullies. And so when you have that type of, they dictate the way things go in the country. What you say as the president is not, you know, your opinion. You can't, if it is your opinion, but it becomes a policy. See, what a president says is a policy. When you begin to start picking on, you know, people, members of the press for asking you questions, when you start lashing out and not being able to control your anger, right? And you're showing this on television, and people think it's okay. Then obviously we have to teach people that's not how you express your anger. You don't lash out at people. You know, those aren't the way that you do things. And so that's what happens with these individuals that are being bullied. You have two choices. Either you're going to destroy yourself, or you're going to destroy somebody else. And those are generally what happens. You get so fed up with it. And now, you know, now that that's become so accustomed in our country, that you're going to start seeing more, you know, the school shootings, you know, how individuals come to school and start shooting kids, you know, how you have, again, you know, kids that are picking on other kids, you know, how we're beginning to socialize each other in Bloods and Crips and Vice Lords and the Latin Kings, and, you know, how liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, it's all the same thing. Because in order for you to survive, you have to figure out which one do you hold on to. And we're no longer individuals in our society. So I guess I want to ask you kids, as far as, and I'm sorry to call you kids because you guys are really smarter than any of us. But how do you feel about what we've been talking about, and how you think that the schools should deal with it?
I feel the school should do more about bullying because bullying starts from home. Like the kid's dad probably could be an alcoholic or the mom could be a drug addict. The way that they're coping with that is to take out their anger and frustration on another kid. That kid could be the one kid to shoot up a school or commit suicide. Last year, my cousins told me that there was a girl who stood at the top of the building of our school and jumped. She only broke her leg, but she was going to commit suicide because of bullying. The school, they should really do something about it because there would be more suicides if they don't do anything. There's a lot of bullying at my school, and I see it a lot. A lot of the kids don't tell because, again, they would be considered a snitch. And being a snitch, I don't think that should be a real word because you're just telling to make sure that somebody is safe. Being a snitch is telling to get somebody in trouble. Like your siblings, if you take a piece of cake that your mom told you not to eat, then that's being a snitch. Well, that's considered being a snitch. But if you're telling to make sure that somebody is safe and to make sure that they're not doing anything they're not supposed to be doing, you're not considered a snitch.
That sounds, you smart. You are smart.
Thank you.
They need to listen to you, and so, because that is important. And I think that you made a really, really, really important point when you talked about the types of individuals who do bully other individuals. Usually, the individual who is involved in bullying other people are generally the individual who probably has the lowest self-esteem, and that's a way for them to feel empowerment by actually, picking on other individuals. That's the way it works. And that's what you see is the weakest individual is always the individual who does most of the, picking on other individuals. Just like the president when he was telling the journalist, the reporter to sit down. He was just using that to pick on the individual. I mean, if the podium wasn't there and you wasn't the president and you were standing out in the audience, you wouldn't say that. So, that's unfortunate that we have individuals that have to lash out at other individuals to make themselves feel better, or to have to wear certain types of clothing to make themselves to feel better, or certain types of shoes to make themselves feel better, or those sort of things. And that's really what it begins with. Is generally the bully is the one that's the problem.
One of the things when I started community service in my youth mentoring group, one of the questions that was often asked to me, what is it that you do with the kids to make them inquire their hours in terms of community service? They said, well, do you paint the walls or do you pick up the trash? I said, no, I don't do neither. I said, because here it is, you got a kid that's probably been arrested for painting on a wall or stealing something from Target or fighting somebody in school. Well, picking up trash or painting on a wall is not going to help them deal with what the problem with that they got them the problem that they got them in trouble in the first place. So I want to put them in a workshop. I want to put them in a group. And let's deal with your mindset. Let's deal with what it was that got you to this point. Let's try to make sure that we deal with this so we don't repeat this behavior again. So I think in terms of the school, and I say that to say this, in terms of the school, they put the kids in detention. What is detention going to do? If you bully a kid, what is the detention? You go to detention, it's over with, you go home, the next day you start the bullying all over again. Or you suspend them. So now once you suspend them, now you done neglected them, their education or their homework for that week. Back again, they come back off of suspension, they back to bullying again. Or you put them in this detention and make them write standards for the younger class. They write standards. But who sits up in class and writes standards and don't feel angered about it? It's because now they're going to be angered about it saying, this snitch, I got to find a way to get this snitch. So the thing about it is, like you say, they have to create something in order to address these issues. I was looking at my my younger son classroom. I seen him standing in line. I seen all these kids back here. They got 3 different classrooms. I seen all these kids back here standing in class. But this first class that he's in, all of these kids is like going like crazy. They're not standing in line. And so I stepped back from that and I began to look at all the classes every day I went. And I realized it seems as though they took the most troubled kids and put them in one classroom.
Yeah.
And I believe they do that.
Yeah.
Well, they did that because they don't know. Look, Ali, you talked about us on the university level, but for years I had 2 Pacific programs. We were in 17 of the USD schools. We had a program called FIRM, Fathers Involved in Refining Males. We had our all-female program. And what we did in those programs, those were manhood, womanhood training components. Not only did we deal with teaching the kids specific strategies on how to deal, and forget the bullying, how to deal with the straight-up hardcore violence that was being perpetrated upon them. That's what bullying really is. We also brought in the parents. We also brought in the teachers. Teachers need to be educated. The reason why the schools don't do better because they don't know how to do better, and they don't want to admit to the fact or humble themselves to realize they can't deal with a lot, and especially the marginalized kids, the kids of color. They have no idea because they've never had to engage, so they go back to old standards that worked in their school system, which they didn't have the complexities. And even at the time, you know, there was a different venue that bullying wasn't going on to the same degree. We're talking about these youngsters losing their lives at the end of the day behind this bullying. Most of your gang warfare is through the internet. That's how they beefing now, and a lot of the kids get caught up in that because they're on the internet day in and day out. We've got to give our kids fundamental tools and not expect the school to do it, and then we've got to put in place for the school specific standards. That's going to take sacrifice on the community's part to come out and dictate to that school what it wants to see. But if we're not even sure what we want to see in terms of the bullying, how do we expect these schools to step up when they have no idea? Goes back to that communal sacrifice that has to be made. We've got to take some real good looks at ourselves. A school is supposed to be the extension of the home. It's supposed to be an extension of what you want that child to learn from the home. We have got to get more engaged with the safety policy development, get more engaged with the school officers, and get more engaged with the whole complexity of how they deal with bullying. Right now, it's not being dealt with, and that's the big part of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things, I mean, I did not, most of my children were homeschooled. I did not send my children to public school the majority of their lives because I understood what the school was, and I understood what the school model is. I mean, it's not for everybody, but I chose to make that move because I felt that, that I knew what the schools were really all about. I think that basically we've, you know, of course we saw the model of the school primarily change in this country, you know, at the end of the Industrial Revolution, and really what does the schools preparing you for? And schools primarily are preparing you for the either prison or the workforce. And basically what you have is, you know, when you go out to the schoolyard, you get to go out to the yard for a certain period of time until they ring the bell and you come back. So it's basically the way that you're teaching the child. The most of what they get out of school is the process, is learning the 9 to 5 or the 8 to 4. You know, going from one classroom to another, and really not that individual understanding of what's going on. And I think that probably in our community, more than any other community, we truly expect that the education, the school system is going to be something that's going to allow us to make sure that our children are receiving the appropriate education and that they can make a better lives for themselves. That's what, you know, we believed, and that's what, you know, and I learned something really valuable because I went to an HBCU. I went to Tennessee State, and I really never really understood what an education was until I went to Tennessee State and was in the class of this professor by the name of Dr. Amiri Yassin El-Hadid, who actually was a great scholar. He started the African Studies Department at Tennessee State University, and I really learned really what you know, being educated, the difference between being trained and educated. And obviously what we're receiving in most of our public schools, and even in many of our private schools, is we're receiving that actual training, and we're not really being educated. And basically an education clearly is something that allows us to actually think for ourselves. And public school does not, schools in general in our society really don't allow that to happen. It teaches you selfishness and individualism, but it really doesn't allow us to really focus on thinking for ourselves, which is truly what we really need as far as an education is concerned. And much if we're really ever going to really begin to start seeing something different, I don't think that we, especially, and I'm talking from a community perspective, is that we're actually going to have to get into a situation where we're going to have to stop relying on the public school system in order to educate our children, because they're not going to do it. It's not going to happen, And I think that, and unfortunately, that we're, in a community where it's like cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle. So we're in many ways, dealing with catch up in many ways. And I think that when you begin to start looking at the different educational systems and knowing that our educational system is not at the top of the list, it's not at the top of the list because that's not really our focus, and it's not really the focus because we want the majority of our people in our community are ending up exactly where they want them to end up. There is a significant crisis in our country. One is the prison system, where we're actually building more prisons than we're building schools. We put more money in the prison system than we put in schools, and so nobody's going to make a big noise about what's going on in our school system, because people aren't really upset, because really things, in many ways, from our perspective, things aren't going right. But for some people, it's okay, because obviously it's affecting certain individuals a different way than it is others. And that's exactly what's really going down in our communities, is that basically we're seeing them going to the exact place in which the school system is allowing them to go. It's not really, creating the type of environment and the type of knowledge that our children really need. And in order to deal with, and that's just really what's going on with the school system in general. But that is, although it seems like it's a different subject, it's really the root problem of bullying. The reason why bullying is allowed to be so prevalent in our school system is because they really don't care. Because I think that what happens is, I think that we're, when we begin to start talking about how we're going to change things, you're talking about a school system, and it's a system, and it's real until the country really sees that as a crisis, then it's going to stay the same. Our country has the ability to change anything that it sees as a crisis. The reason why we have to wake up and understand that the reason why it continues to function the way it does is because they don't see it as a crisis, because it's affecting individuals that they care the least about. And so once we really, and I think that basically we're spinning our wheels. We continue to talk about the same thing, because we're going to, at the end of this show, what are we going to give our listeners to allow them to understand what they need to do to change this issue of bullying within our school system. And the reason why I wanted to make this a two-part type of discussion, with number one with bullying, and number two with the issue of, is it a breeding ground for criminal activity, is because it is a breeding ground for criminal activity. And the school system isn't going to change it. It's something that we have to, the first thing that we have to do is wake up and realize that they are not going to do it for us. And that what we need to do at this point in time is try to figure out a way to make sure that we're trying to educate our children outside of the education, of the school system. Right, and I think that we need to begin to start looking at some of these other alternatives as opposed to the regular school system. I think that we need to make sure that we begin to start, instead of utilizing the school system that isn't being responsive to us, to begin to start looking at other ways that we can educate our children and give them those things. Look at the alternatives and stop looking at the school system to do what they're supposed to do. Now, it goes beyond our own community. It's not just school bullying is not limited to the black community or the minority community. It's off the hook. Now, a lot of these children that are killing themselves are white kids. So it's not something that's just limited to our system, but I think it also goes to the bigger problem. And the bigger problem, one thing that our society will never really truly understand, is that the way in which social construct was created in our country, it is to create the whole idea of separation between individuals based upon this false narrative of black and white. So as long as you can create the false narrative between black and white, then you separate individuals, and it allows for the power to maintain its power. The only time that you see societies that really call their government to answer is through this whole idea when you begin to start looking at coups, right? Whenever you see the government not being responsive to its country, they turn against the government. But they have an advantage in our country, because as long as they can make one person think it's somebody else's problem, then you can do whatever you want to. And that's kind of the way that they've done things, is that they've created this whole narrative, and while they sit back and get rich and fat and have us at each other's throat and making us believe things that are part of a social construct that's not really true. So again, going back to the whole issue of bullying, I think that we really have to start realizing that we have to create mechanisms and alternatives in our community that goes beyond the school system.
But there are prime examples out there. You know, we've got to look back at times. We had some of the most successful school paradigms in the nation. Sister Claire Muhammad School, W.D. Du Bois School, and right here in Los Angeles, we had the Marcus Garvey Center. These were institutions of excellence for decades that turned out some of the best scholars, some of the best educated individuals, and there was no bullying going on because there was a different construct. You know, I can only speak for the black community, but I think every community that is having this issue really has to create the educational system which is going to truly empower their kids. And one of the reasons that there wasn't any bullying in these schools is because we had an enforcement policy on board. We did not allow it as parents and orchestrators of those institutions, and we gave the balance of why the young adults should not bully. There was alternatives in the thinking process. So I think we need to look at best practices that have been utilized in the past and pull from those, take the best and reject the rest in terms of building a new construct in moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that when you was talking about whether or not that it's a breeding ground for criminal behavior inside the school, I can remember a report that I just read about 3 months ago. They just came out with studies that says that there's more police on campus now than there are counselors. The only time you see counselors is when a tragedy happened. You don't see them before the tragedy happens where they can deal with the issue. You only see them after the tragedy happened. And also, I want to highlight this. Cyberbullying is no joke. And let me tell you, it is more powerful than bullying in person. Now, here's why I say that. You can catch a fight video, and you can see that video being shared over 100,000 times or 1,000 times. Well, that individual that is being bullied or that is being beat, that person is being bullied on camera. And so now when that person goes online or they hear about it and they look, now they didn't just got bullied by 100,000 individuals. How does that make them feel? So what I'm saying, the audience for cyberbullying is more vast than it is just at school. So stop sharing the damn videos.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you, and before we go, is there anything that you guys would like to tell someone maybe who's listening that maybe have been subjected to this type of bullying? Is there anything that you would like to share with those individuals?
Yes. Okay. If you're being bullied, I feel nobody is different from each other. Nobody's better than one another. Just because you have more money than the other, money doesn't buy happiness. Love is not materialistic. If you love someone, then you won't just buy them stuff just to show them that you love them. You would spend time with them. You wouldn't just buy them everything. Okay. Nobody is better. We all bleed the same color of blood, which is red. Right. And nobody is different. Right. Like, nobody is better. Just because you have more money doesn't mean that you're happier, doesn't mean that you're better, doesn't mean that you are worth more than another person.
Yes, well said. Do you have anything? Go ahead.
If you're being bullied, it's just because people think they're the big dog and they're bigger, so they'll bully you to get what they want, and just to prove to everybody and show the crowd, and to make you feel dumb.
Yeah. That's well said, and I think the one thing that we don't do as people, as individuals, is that that children are smarter than we are.
Yes, they are.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
and so,
they are.
and they understand that just what she said and what he said are the things that we should be saying to each other. And all of the things that we say to each other, as brilliant as they may sound, as academic as they may sound, there's nothing more brilliant than what these two people have shared with us today. So that's one of the things we need to do, is start listening to our children.
Yes, sir.
So again, for all of you that tuned in today, thank you both for tuning in with us today. Thank you and I'd like to see you come back. And on behalf of the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, and Dr. Akil Bashir, thanks everyone for joining in, and until next week, we'll see you at the same time, same place, and same channel. And until that time, stay blessed.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3 FM.